As it is now April, the NFL draft is right around the corner, which means each of the NFC North teams need to address some positions. Today, we will go through each team and their needs to improve their roster. If you enjoy this kind of NFL content, support the Gridiron Podcast by subscribing below. We really appreciate it. As the Bears inch toward building for a Super Bowl, the Packers looking to go beyond the wild card round, the Lions still looking to be a competitive team, and the Vikings are in a world of QB trouble. These teams need to fill some gaps on their roster through this year's NFL draft. Let us know down in the comments if you agree or disagree with these players we think would make a great fit. All right, so NFL draft around the corner later this month. Let's kind of go into the team needs by position for each of these teams, the Packers, Bears, Lions, and Vikings. So we'll start off with your Packers. What do you think are the needs that they need going into this NFL draft?
Yeah, so the Green Bay Packers don't have a first round pick, but in the second round, their immediate draft selection should be a corner and addressing that cornerback room. That has to be it because any guy that you draft in the second round, I think the Packers have 52, if I'm not mistaken. Any guy that you take there, I think will upgrade this cornerback room, and the Packers are desperate for cornerback help. So I think cornerback is the position that the Packers need to address right away.
Yeah, so definitely that corner position, as we've talked over the past couple episodes, that the Packers secondary is one that needs to be addressed. And we were talking before going live that we think that each one of these NFC North teams really need all the same things. And we can also touch on edge position for the Packers. They need a running back to back up Josh Jacobs. They need offensive line and defensive line, as there are some weak spots on the roster for each one of those positions.
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised if the Packers don't select a corner here, but at the same time, I wouldn't be surprised if they do have a name, a defensive lineman that they really like, who they think can be that guy. I know Lucas Van Ness will be that guy this year for edge, but they traded away a piece in their defensive line. They desperately need to build up that defensive line, but I mean, they do still have young guys like Colin Oliver and Warren Brinson, who will definitely be counted on to make some plays. But nonetheless, cornerback, number one priority it should be, and the defensive line would be the fallback. But I definitely expect them to go corner. I wouldn't be surprised at defensive line though.
Yeah, so let's go into the Chicago Bears next. And I feel like it's a lot of similarities, like I said, in the NFC North. And I think their needs are edge rusher, safety, defensive line, offensive line, and wide receiver. Because obviously, with wide receiver losing DJ Moore, you kind of need another key piece in that wide receiver room. Now, it's interesting because they do have a first round draft pick at number 26. Do we see a top talent still being available, knowing the teams that are ahead of them for really any of these positions?
Yeah, I definitely see there's safeties. I think three safeties in this draft that are really good. I think Caleb Downs will go in the, well, I wouldn't say top 10 because there's been no safety recently that's gone in the top 10, I don't think. I know Kyle Hamilton's gone 12, and Derwin James, I think, went 18, 16 or 18, one of those two. I definitely see Caleb Downs, though, going, 12, 14 range. And then there's the guy from Toledo. I don't know, but this is interesting because, as you said, we'll talk about the other North teams at the Vikings. I mean, they're ahead of the Bears. If the Bears don't go safety, I definitely see them taking a offensive tackle, the left tackles, because Ozzy Trapillo's coming off an injury, and they don't have a solidified. I know they got Braxton Jones still, but he's kind of eh. So building up that left tackle would not be a bad idea, especially when eventually guys like Joe Tooney will, retire, and this offensive line will need to be restructured. So I definitely see a safety or left tackle for the Chicago Bears.
Yeah, I can agree with that. I would also say potential edge, as there are
Yeah.
a decent amount of edge rushers in this year's draft. Now, wide receiver they might take later in the draft. I don't see them going first round for a wide receiver. Yes, there are some of those guys, but a lot of those guys that are wide receivers are going to possibly go top 10.
Yeah. And moving on to the Minnesota Vikings, as I just touched on, they need a safety as well. They need defensive line as well. They need offensive line, but I see that kind of later.
Yeah.
And then wide receiver as well, which I also can see later because I think they have pick number 19. So I think that if they were to address one or two of these positions, it would have to be safety or defensive line. I think Flores wants to rebuild that defensive line, especially losing the guys that he did. But there are some safeties, like I said, there are three safeties that could go first round. So I could definitely see them taking, well, I think Caleb Downs, as I said, will be gone, but the kid from Toledo or the guy from Oregon, if I'm not mistaken. So we'll see. We'll see. I definitely see safety or defensive line, though, for the Minnesota Vikings.
Yeah, and they have pick number 18 in
Yeah.
this year's draft. I could honestly also see them needing a corner
Yeah.
because we really don't know what's going to be happening with that secondary this year. And you touched on it, they definitely need that safety help, but I can also see corner where there's limited amount of corners this year in the draft, but there are some of those guys that could potentially squeak into the first round because a lot of those teams that are ahead of the Vikings, even at their pick at 18, they also need corner help and safety. So we'll have to see how that goes for them. But let's push our focus over to the Detroit Lions, as this is a position that I've been saying since really 2 years ago when we started this podcast that they needed. That's an edge rusher because currently they only have Aiden Hutchinson, and then they got a couple people in free agency that can kind of fill that other side. And then they have Ahmed Husseinin, I think is how you say his name. He was a guy that we drafted last year from Boise State. But edge rusher, corner, offensive line, safety, and defensive line. The defensive line, 100%, we need help on. Corners and safeties is kind of iffy for me right now, but it is definitely a need, as we just also re-signed Avante Maddox. So there is a couple of pieces that we could really use the depth and the development of some of these rookies in the secondary, but offensive line, defensive line, and edge are really those top three positions that I really need to see. Now, we talked before this recording that nearly every single mock draft for the Lions has them taking an offensive tackle to start with. And I don't hate that, but I do know there are some key edge rushers that could go in the first round and could potentially fall to the Lions that I need to see them potentially scoop up. Offensive line, we can get in the second round, third round. Even the secondary, we can get in later rounds. But edge rusher and offensive line, I think, are the two that we need to focus on in those early rounds, just because of the amount of people that are with those positions. There's not as much as in terms of secondary that you can get in later rounds. versus also defensive line.
You just answered my question for me. I was going to ask you if the Lions didn't go edge in the first round, who would you want them to address? And you said the offensive line. So I guess that does answer my question. So you wouldn't be mad at that.
I would not be mad at that, especially with their pick at 13. So it is going to be very interesting to see what Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell do in the first round, as a lot of times they go for a very confusing pick in the first round, and then later in the rounds they get those star players. Thinking of people like Amon-Ra St. Brown, Derek Barnes, they've gotten in later rounds. So we'll have to see what each one of these teams do.
Since we touched on this, it reminded me. So because the news came out earlier this week that Sexy Dexy wants to be released from the Giants or at least traded, we talked about the North needing
Yep.
a defensive lineman. Do we see any of these teams getting Sexy Dexy? I can rule out the Packers because there's no way the Packers have the cap space, as he's due like 22 million this year, and I think he has another year on his contract, so 2 years remaining, I believe, and then obviously re-signing. So, do we see the NFC North bringing in Dexter Lawrence?
I can honestly see two teams potentially doing it in the North, that being the Bears and the Lions. Those are two of the ones that really have the cap space to be able to get Sexy Dexy. And especially knowing the respect that Dan Campbell has for Dexter Lawrence, I could see, especially the connection they have too, I could see them getting him because he is a guy that could potentially fill in when Aleem McNeil needs a break. But I could also see the Bears just because their cap space is absurd going into this year. And knowing the needs that they kind of need as well, the defensive line slash edge, I could see them potentially making that move. Minnesota, I don't see them making a move like that, and the Packers just don't have the cap space to be able to make that move. If they did have the cap space, I could see them potentially restructuring a Jordan Love contract or a Micah Parsons contract to be able to get that cap space. But knowing the contracts that the Lions have done this year, mainly 1 year contracts, and restructuring Jared Goff's contract and working on restructuring Amon-Ra St. Brown's contract, I could see them potentially making a move. Same with the Bears.
The other factor to this, why I rule out the Packers as well, is because the Giants are looking for a first round. I'm not sure
Yeah.
if it's this year or 2027, but it doesn't matter for the Packers nonetheless. Is it really worth it if you are Ryan Poles, 28 years old? Dexter Lawrence he had a fall off year last year. I mean, it was absurd. So,
Yeah.
was it just a one-off season, or is he really worth that money? I mean, if you're the Bears, if I'm Ryan Poles, I'm not committing to that. I mean, just draft capital reasons. I think that they can use that draft pick to address another position. Yeah, I mean, their defensive line's bad, but it's not, we need to be desperate bad. So, I don't know. If I'm the Bears, I don't see it.
Yeah. And kind of to speak also on the Lions, kind of going off of that, is you just drafted Tyleik Williams last year with your first round pick, and he had a pretty decent rookie season. And then you still don't really know what's going to happen with Aleem McNeil, what's going to happen with DJ Reader, because there are negotiations happening with DJ Reader, and you don't really know what's going to be happening with him. I can see if DJ Reader goes to another team, then potentially the Lions try to go for Dexter Lawrence. But if DJ Reader stays, I don't see them going after him because you already have guys like Miles Adams who can kind of step in. You have Tyleik Williams. You have Aleem McNeil, who's now 2 years off his injury, and also potentially DJ Reader. So I think it really depends on what happens with DJ Reader. And I feel like the Lions could potentially get away with next year's first and maybe a second for next year. We'll have to see what these teams do. So it'd be interesting.
Yeah, I just had to bring that up because we just talked about all these North teams needing defensive linemen, and I don't think Dexter Lawrence will come to the North. But with that being said, Nick, let's go ahead and talk about some of these players that the NFC North could draft, we could see on our future teams, and if we'll be happy with it. And I want to start off with, let's go ahead and do this in order. Let's start with your Detroit Lions, and we just talked about their needs. If you think that they're going to take an offensive tackle or edge, you're big on edge, so let's start there. Who are some candidates that you would like to see the Detroit Lions take if you think they will be available? Because I know guys like, or the guy David Bailey, I know he'll be gone most definitely. But who are some other candidates that you would like to see the Detroit Lions take at number 13, is it?
Yeah. One person is definitely Akeem Mesidor out of Miami because I feel like he kind of fits opposite of Aiden Hutchinson. That quick initial burst off the snap. He's very quick and he has those techniques like the swim move, the spin move that he could be able to utilize on the other side of Aiden Hutchinson, who really prides himself on his quickness and his aggressiveness and his initial contact moves. I would also say, just looking at the list,
Yeah, I think Mesidor is good. I don't recall. I think he had double digit sacks last year, but I know he was in like his sixth year, fifth year, or something like that. I know he's a later guy, but yeah, I mean, he's a physical guy, aggressive for sure. I think I could definitely see him in Detroit with that play style and Dan Campbell. I wouldn't be upset if the Lions took him if I were you. I mean, he looks like a beast.
yeah, and I would also put Malachi Lawrence in there out of UCF because he is another guy that is kind of quick and he had 18 and a half sacks through 5 years. And another one, this is kind of tough because I will say Arvil Reese out of Ohio State, but I can see him going earlier. And potentially TJ Parker out of Clemson. He's another guy that I feel like can really fit that Dan Campbell, Brad Holmes type of player, even that Kelvin Shepard type of player. Those are really the three because David Bailey's probably going to go quicker. Same with Keldrick Folk out of Auburn. So it's going to be interesting because Malachi Lawrence is a guy that, as I was speaking on him, is very underrated. And I definitely feel like he can be a guy that can sneak into the first round, maybe early second round, because just seeing the other edge rushers that are within this draft, you can see potentially where he kind of falls in.
So if you had the choice between Mesidor and Lawrence, who are you taking if you're the Detroit Lions?
Messidor.
Okay, I was gonna say I think Lawrence is definitely a second round guy. Um, I don't see a world that he could fall into the first, especially if the Lions are picking at 13. I mean, that's kind of
Yeah.
ballsy to be fair. Um,
Hey, they picked Jameer Gibbs at 12.
yeah, yeah, that is true. I mean, you never know the draft boards. You never know. You never know. Moving on to the Minnesota Vikings, we'll go ahead and do that. We said that they were gonna pick. You said a corner. And I think they'll take a safety. I'm big on the safety position. So at corner, who do you think that they would be taken at? I know I mixed these up. 18 or 19?
They're at 18.
18.
One big name that kind of sticks out to me is Jermod McCoy out of Tennessee, just because he is a guy that has very quick feet, and you need that at the corner position, and especially going up against those top receivers in the NFC North with Amon-Ra St. Brown, you have Christian Watson, and Even a guy like Luther Burden for the Bears, you need those quick feet, and he is a guy that has that. Now, another couple of people that I could see them taking, but it's really questionable because you're going to see a lot of people that may very well be second, third round picks. And that is a guy like Colton Hood out of Tennessee as well. He is very underrated for sure. And even Mansour Delane out of LSU. Those three I could see potentially the Vikings taking, but it's going to be very, very close in terms of who they're going to pick with their first round draft pick at 18 if they want to go for a corner. Because, like I said, there's not a lot of corners that are within this draft class.
On the flip side for me, I said that they'll take a safety, and I mean, I was really big on Dylan Thieneman as he's been flying up draft boards. I mean, coming from Oregon, I mean, Harrison Smith's going to be retiring soon, so they need to consider who's going to replace him. Yeah, I mean, he's a guy who can play down inside the box. He's good on the line, but he does have some tackling issues. But the other guy that I just saw was the guy from Toledo, Emmanuel. I already forgot his whole name, but I was looking into him, and he doesn't seem like
Emmanuel
he's.
McNeil Warren.
Yeah, he doesn't. I was reading up on him. He doesn't seem like a first round draft pick, which is interesting. But I do see some mock drafts having the Vikings take him. And I know Caleb Downs, I said, is going to be gone. So, I mean, your only option if you're the Vikings and you're going to go safety is really Dylan Thieneman. So I'd be surprised if they take the guy from Toledo. It looks like he does have some tackling issues and some other versatility issues. But yeah, if I'm the Minnesota Vikings, I'm probably going to go safety and take Dylan Thieneman. So if I'm the Chicago Bears, though, I think I think I'm going to address that offensive tackle position. I think Caden Proctor makes sense if you're the Chicago Bears at left tackle from Alabama. I think protecting Caleb Williams at all costs is a priority. And if you get Caden Proctor, I mean, he was really good at Alabama. Low pressures, low sacks last year. Started a lot. So, I mean, I think he's a good candidate, especially, like I said, with Ozzie Trapillo being injured and coming off injury. You just don't know how he's going to be. So, yeah, I mean, if I'm the Chicago Bears, I'd be taking left tackle with that first round draft pick, but I could also see them going a different direction and also going safety if Dylan Thieneman is there.
Yeah, and I can also see them potentially going Blake Miller out of Clemson. It's really questionable with him because he is a guy that is a little bit slower on his feet, but I would 100% agree with Caden Proctor. I know I've seen mock drafts of him going to the Lions as well. So I am very high on Caden Proctor out of Alabama. So we'll have to see, but I do 100% agree on that Caden Proctor.
Yeah, I mean, I think is a really good tackle. I mean, would I be surprised if the Lions take him too before? That would be interesting. I don't know if they they do need a left tackle, right?
Yeah.
So wouldn't be surprised there too. With that being said, the Packers don't have a first round draft pick. We talked about it. Obviously traded away in that Micah Parsons deal. They do have a second round pick at 52, and I think this is a crucial pick for the Packers because it's almost like you have to hit this one. And as I said personally, they got to go corner. Yeah, they have to adjust the cornerback position. I'd be surprised if they don't. But some guys that I like, Chris Johnson from San Diego State. I mean, he's a fast outside corner guy, physical guy. When I was looking at his tape, I mean, he just seemed like a Jair Alexander replica, like aggressive, press you on the line kind of guy. Made up some space, if he got beat with speed. I know he was at San Diego State, but I mean, Packers, well, no, I shouldn't say that. Packers have not drafted corner well at all as of recently since the Super Bowl era. They drafted Demarius Randall, they drafted Ha Ha Clinton Dix, they drafted, gosh, who else didn't work out? Just Eric Stokes, I guess you could say, but just they have not drafted well in the cornerback position. They have to hit this one. They have to hit this one.
Yeah, and I kind of went down the line of defensive line, and one person I really like is Dominique Orange out of Iowa State. I mean, 6'2", 322 pounds. He's a great run stopper, very quick, and can easily get him into the backfield. And over 3 seasons, I mean, 45 pressures over 3 seasons. Another person I like is TJ Parker out of Clemson. In 2024, he had a really solid season, 11 sacks, 19 and a half tackles for loss, and 6 forced fumbles. He had a little bit of slower year last year in 2025 with 5 sacks, 9.5 tackles for loss, and 3 fumble recoveries. And he's a guy that he's big and he's quick. So it's gonna be defensive line, in my opinion. Corner, I can 100% agree with Chris Johnson, but I'll even put in Devin Moore out of Florida. Very good vertical speed, and he's another guy that is almost like Chris Johnson out of San Diego State.
Yeah, I mean, these NFC North teams, I think it's actually really critical. I'd say the Packers have a good draft. I'd say the Lions need a hit on their first round guy. I mean, that's big. I don't know, like if they go offensive line as we talked about or edge, I mean, it's going to be very interesting to see. And I mean, I think if the Bears, whoever's there at their number is going to be okay. But I think it's critical for the Lions to get their guy and the Packers in the second round to hit with their guy if, they want to compete in this next year. I mean, that's not going to be the you know, ultimate decider, but it'll certainly be very effective, especially with a team like the Chicago Bears in their division. So, I think it's very important. This draft is actually very important.
Yeah, so on that note, we should see what each team of these teams do in the draft to improve their situation. Make sure to comment below who you want your team to draft. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you guys in the next episode.